it's Mo. It's time to do another 2022 book haul revisit. So 2022 was the year that I started my RAB spreadsheet. It was my second and a half or first and a half year on BookTube, and I was bringing in lots and lots of books. I was going to a lot of book sales, I was going to a lot of thrift stores, I was going to a lot of free libraries, and I was bringing in all these books, and I decided that I wanted to see how many books I was bringing in. So I not only started my RAB spreadsheet, my recently acquired books spreadsheet, where I marked down every single book that I brought into the house, where I got them, how much they cost, if I bought them, if I found them, if they were used, if they were new, if they were going on my TBR, or if they were maybe going on a collection or something like that. But I also made book haul videos, which I don't usually do because I'm not a big book haul fan. But this year, I wanted to go back through those book haul videos. I wanted to react to them and see if I have read the books that I brought in each month. So we've done January through July already, and January through July was more than 7 videos because there was some extra videos in there, like I did one specifically for my birthday. So we're going to jump back in with August. I haven't done one of these videos in a while, partly just because life has been busy, but I want to try and finish this series by the end of the year. So I want to try and get through all the rest of these book hauls by the end of the year. So let's go ahead and start a screen recording because I never remember to start a screen recording ever. And let's look at the books that I brought into the house in August of 2022. While I'm looking at these videos, I'm also making a priority read list. If you check out my end of year TBR, I use that priority read list from the first 7 months of the year to prioritize some of those books that I want to read in the end of the year. So definitely go ahead and check out my end of year TBR to see some of those books. So we're going to see what I've read, what I've unhauled, if anything's gone into the basement, because I do put books in my basement box books, and kind of a companion to the series was looking at all the books that I have in my basement and trying to pare those down. And then we can also put collections, because some books do go on my red shelf in collections. That doesn't mean that I'm not eventually going to read them, but they're kind of more of a collection book than a book that I'm going to read as a priority. Okay, so this one doesn't have any little free library content in the beginning. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it's worth noting, I think. And then also, this one is only 13 minutes long. So that bodes well as well. I also talk about how I went to a bunch of little free libraries in Long Beach Island, New Jersey this month. So I did get quite a few books at those little free libraries, and I used book sales there. The first book that I see is Kay Gibbons, Sights Unseen. This is unread. I read Ellen Foster by Kay Gibbons at some point before this, so I just wanted to pick up another Kay Gibbons when I saw it. The next book is also unread. It is a short story collection. It's called Inspector Sato's Small Satori by Jan William Van Wettering, and this is, I believe, a sci-fi short story collection. Inspector Sato is the main character to a series, and these are short stories that go along with it. I think I also have another one of these series now that I didn't get until much later. The next book is also unread, and that is Voyage in the Dark by Jean Rhys. I've only read one Jean Rhys so far, and that was The Wide Sargasso Sea, but I have been picking up Jean Rhys because I really enjoyed that book, and I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't really enjoyable, but I was happy to have read it, and I would like to read more Jean Rhys in the future. The next book is our first read book, and it is John Darnell's, what is this book called? I really enjoyed it. It's like a horror book, but it's like a quiet horror book about a man working in a video store. Oh, Universal Harvester. So this book, Universal Harvester, is about a young man living in the Midwest working in a VHS store, rental store, back in the time when there were still those, when they still existed in the world. And it's very like quiet horror novel. I really enjoyed it, actually. It's not the most horrific, but it stuck with me longer than I thought it was going to. The next book is unread. It is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This is one that I've been meaning to read. I have never read any Virginia Woolf. It's a classic. I like this kind of school textbook style cover, and I am looking forward to reading that one, but I have not read it yet. I mentioned here that I also have Mrs. Dalloway, which I also haven't read. Another unread book, we're not doing so good in this video so far, is Wild Town by Jim Thompson. I've read a couple of books by Jim Thompson, notably The Grifters, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy noir mysteries just generally, so I'm always happy to pick up another book by Jim Thompson or Dashiell Hammett, etc., etc. So this one is unread, but still on my shelves. The next book is unread, and it is The Quarry by Damon Galgut. I've heard only good things about this, and Damon Galgut in general. He's been up for like several big prizes and things, but this one is a earlier short novel of his, and it's all told in little vignettes, and it sounds really, really interesting and a little like mysterious and dark as well. So I'm still wanting to get to this one, but I have not gotten to it yet. This is one that's been on quite a few like lists of mine at different times since 2022. I thought I was going to get to it, and I just haven't yet. This should be a priority on the priority read list. The next book is a unhaul. So this is Poe by John Eric Cardine, and this is a book that revolves around Hawaiian myth, I think. And it sounded really interesting when I first got it, but a little more research led me to believe that this is just a white author kind of appropriating a Hawaiian mythology or Hawaiian spirituality story. So I did end up unhauling this one. The next book I have read, and that is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. I really like this Frankenstein retelling. It's a very faithful retelling, and it's not got all that many twists or turns. If you have read Frankenstein, I read this after I read Frankenstein, which I had not read at this point, I don't believe. But I know that Books and Lala really like this one, and some other people that I like. I did really enjoy it. I unhauled this book after I read it. It's not one that I could see myself really revisiting very often, but I am glad to have read it. The next book I also have read. It is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is a coming of age. It's called like a lesbian love story or a lesbian romance, but the romance is really a side story or a backstory to the main character's coming of age story and how she is finding herself after years and years of academia and not knowing what to do once she gets out of that academic life. This book reminded me so much of Weetzie Bat. It is very overwritten, and it is very like lyrical and has tons of like similes and metaphors, and it's just like a lot. I did enjoy this book, but I did unhaul this book even though the cover is gorgeous because it just wasn't really for me. I think if I had read this around the time that I was reading the Weetzie Bats books, I probably would have loved it, especially because it does feature lesbian characters and a strong found family / friend group, but now it was just a little too much for my current reading tastes, but I did enjoy it. The next book I got on Long Beach Island in a little free library, and that is Mina by Marie Corrali. This is a Dracula companion or retelling talking about Mina Harkness and Mina Harker. And I have not read this one. It is still on my TBR. The next book is also unread. That is Still Life in Harlem, which is a nonfiction book. It is on my nonfiction shelf. I actually just picked it up the other day thinking I might read it. I was hoping that there was an audio version of it, but there's not. This, I believe, is about a young man growing up in Harlem. I am still super interested to read this one, but I have not read it yet. The next book I have read, and that I read it this year in 2024, and that is The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan He. This is a cli-fi young adult novel about two sisters who have somehow fallen out of contact with each other and are trying to get back to each other. I actually really like this book. People really hated this one. I thought it was interesting, and I thought it had a lot of interesting things going on. I don't think it was super well executed, and I don't think it was like super cohesive, But I would love to see what else Joan He writes, and I would love to read more by this author. And I did enjoy my time with The Ones We're Meant to Find, and it is a super beautiful cover. I mentioned how there's quite a bit of young adult in here, and it's funny because I don't really read that much young adult, but I've read most of the young adults, or some of the young adults that I've mentioned so far. The next book is unread. It's still on my shelves. It is A Keeper by Graham Norton. I haven't read any Graham Norton yet, and I don't know what this one is about. I've heard good things about Graham Norton's writing. He is a British writer and also, I believe, a talk show host. So similar to like Richard Osman, but I think Graham Norton writes more literary fiction. This one just has a really beautiful cover, so I was happy to find it at a library sale, and I do still have it on my want to read list. The next book is another book that is unread, and it is another book that I recently thought about reading. It is Things We Lost to the Water by Eric Nguyen. This is a novel set in New Orleans, and I think it is post-Katrina, so I think it's all about the things that were lost in Katrina and I think a family's life. I don't know. An old coworker, Haley, who I'm still in contact with via Instagram, read this and she really, really loved it. So I've always wanted to read this one. I wanted to read it before she read it, actually, because it was set in New Orleans and I love books set in New Orleans, and I was getting the hankering the other day to read a New Orleans book, so this might be one that I read soon, maybe even by the end of the year. It's funny because I mentioned that Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier is one that in this video in 2022 I was thinking about not keeping. I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep it because it's a domestic thriller, and I have unhauled that book, so I gave it to my friend Michael because he likes thrillers. I went back and forth on it. I think I did try a chapter and it just didn't really interest me, so that one is unhauled. I wasn't sure about it in 2022. I'm sure about it now. I'm not going to read it. The next book is unread, but still on my TBR. That's Once We Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. We had Migrations earlier in these book haul revisits, and it made it onto my priority read list. And if you watch that end of year TBR, it made it onto my end of year TBR. So I might be reading her first novel, Migrations, at some point this year, and that might make a difference towards Once We Were Wolves. Maybe I will end up wanting to read it right away, or maybe I will end up unhauling it. Who knows? But I'm not going to put it on my priority read list because her other book is on that list, but this book is unread and still on my TBR. The next book is unread. It is The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. So this one I did do a trial chapter with as well. I didn't really enjoy the chapter that I read, but the part that I read and seeing how this book was structured and how it goes back in time with the family that it revolves around was interesting to me. I don't usually like multiple perspectives, but this one is like kind of a bunch of chapters from each person, which I do like almost as separate books. So this one is still on my TBR. I still do plan on reading it. I did see that my library has this book as a audiobook, so it could be a good one to read on audio. Another book that I tried a chapter of, another book that I unhauled, is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Devin. This book was making the booktube rounds when I picked it up in 2022. People were loving it. People still love it. I read the first chapter and it wasn't really for me. It just seems like it's supposed to be a very intimate, heartwarming story. And again, those are just not the kind of books that I normally read. But again, this is such a beautiful cover. It's one of my favorite covers of recent years. The Hokusai painting on it is, a favorite painting. I like to see that pop up in media in general, but especially the lettering and the colors of this cover are so beautiful. But I have unhauled this one. The next book is unread. It is The World Treasury of Mushrooms. This is a guidebook, a illustrated guide to mushrooms. It's so beautiful. I love the illustrations in this book. I love the cover, but I have not read it yet. It's one of those books that I probably will get to at some point, but it's definitely not a priority. Interesting. I do talk about maybe putting it right on my reference shelf. Currently, it is on my TBR. The next book is unread, and it's either on my TBR or it's in the basement. I might have put it in the basement. A Pine Barrens Odyssey. It is a locally written and locally published book about the New Jersey Pine Barrens, which is a ecosystem that we have here in New Jersey, a very unique ecosystem. And it's a place that I used to vacation when I was younger, and it's a wonderful place to explore. So I was super excited to read this book by a naturalist, by a environmentalist, but it's definitely going to be one of those really dry textbooky type books. So at the moment it is unread. The next book I believe is in the basement. I'm going to put it on unread, even though I think it's in the basement, and that is Daughters of the Goddess, the Woman Saints of India. Now this is a book written, I believe, by a white author about women saints in India, living women saints. I think Indian religion is an interesting one because there are many living saints of various religions living in India now. So this one does sound really interesting to me, but it's one that I don't foresee getting to anytime soon. It's one that I wouldn't want to give away necessarily, so I think I have put it in the basement, but we'll just call it TBR because I'm not 100% sure. The next book is unread, and it is still in my TBR. It is a nonfiction book called Castle, and it is about castles. It's an illustrated book. It's a children's book, but it's one of those illustrated children's books that is pretty dense and has a lot of words as well as pictures. The pictures are absolutely beautiful. The illustrations are super detailed, pencil drawings, and I really enjoy it. It's one that I do want to sit down and read, but it's going to be like a little longer than a children's book, you know what I mean? A little more time, a little more brain power, but I do have it on my TBR, even though it is unread. The last book is on my collections. It's the first and only book we have on collections. It is Night Shift by Stephen King. You can actually, can you see it here? It's on my bookcase over here somewhere, but I don't think you can see it in this shot, but it is a gorgeous cover. It is amazing, beautiful mass market cover from the 80s, and I got it strictly for that cover. I've read my one and only Stephen King book. I don't need to read any more Stephen King. This one does have a lot of good short stories in it, supposedly. It has a lot of the stories that were in the movie Cat's Eye, which is a horror movie that I did love when I was a kid. Loved, hated, scared me, terrifying, but I loved. And cat violence, which I hate, but I did love that there was a cat throughout it. But anyway, the point is there's a lot of stories in there that are in that movie, and I'm so glad that I have this copy of this book because it is so, so beautiful, but I never planned on reading it, so it's just a collection book. So those are all the books that I picked up in August of 2022. It's 24 books. 16 of them are unread. That's a lot of unread books. I did not do good on this one. The only one that I put on my priority list is The Quarry by Damon Galgut. I think that's a good one to be on there. I read 4 of these books, which is not bad. Out of those 4 books, I unhauled a lot of those books after I read them that year, so that's also kind of good. And then I did unhaul 3 without reading them, and one of them is on my collections. So not the best return to this series, not the best of the book haul revisits that we've done, but another one under my belt. So I'm glad that I only got that many books. That was a lot less books than I've had in the past. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here, especially those books that are still on my TBR. Let me know if I should prioritize any of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!